my wife Chulon and I would like to thank you for allowing us to join you this evening. It's an honor for us to be back in the Van Dorn family. And we appreciate the invitation, and we appreciate being here. Thank you very much. I'm not sure who the hell that is. He disappeared years ago. But some things don't change, no? If you can visualize the U.S. Army flag, it's a white flag with red and blue symbology, and at the bottom of that flag is a date, 1775. 1775 was when the Second Continental Congress organized what they call the Continental Army, which we know as the United States Army. And that's when they also identified and named George Washington as the first commander of that Continental Army. That was 248 years ago, if my math is good. 248 years. And since then, the United States Army has fought a total of 192 campaigns throughout the world. Now, a campaign is either a big battle or it's a series of battles with a beginning date and end date, and that campaign is identified as in some way changing, making a significant change in a war. And there have been 192 of them. And as we saw in one of those videos, it was Abraham Lincoln that signed the paper that organized the 18th Infantry Regiment. In those days, a regular Army infantry regiment during the Civil War was a big outfit. They had a total of 5 battalions. And once the first battalion of the 18th Infantry had been organized and manned and equipped and prepared, they marched off to begin their participation in the Civil War. And the other 4 battalions followed them in due course. And of course, the campaigns that they participated in the Civil War were big fights. Chickamauga, Chattanooga, down the railroad to Atlanta, up to defend Nashville, and others. And all of those campaigns are embroidered on campaign streamers, which are attached to the battalion colors here. And what I want to do for just a couple of minutes is take a look at some of those campaign streamers. But I can't do it on my own. I need a volunteer. And I asked somebody to jump up here and give me a hand. Where's my volunteer? Where is he? Here he is. No. I thought, here it comes. Come on in. Oh, I got a medic. I got a medic, just in case an old guy like me, I may need some medical support before this thing is over. What we're going to do is take a look at the campaign streamers that are attached to this battalion's colors. Let's go. Okay. Good enough. Just like that. Now, these streamers, and in the case of this battalion, there are over 50 of them attached to the battalion colors, start with those Civil War campaigns. And they're in a variety of colors, and the colors of each of these streamers identify what war those campaigns pertain to. Civil War streamers are like this: two-tone, blue and gray, Yankee blue, Confederate gray. And embroidered on the streamer is the name of the campaign. And in this case, Mississippi 1862. So the 18th Infantry Regiment was involved in those battles and those advances down in the western sphere of the Civil War, down in Mississippi and then later down toward Atlanta. As we saw a few minutes ago, following the Civil War, the regiment also participated in the Indian campaigns. And they participated in a number of Indian campaigns out in Wyoming, before Wyoming was a state. And those Indian colors are black and red. And they're in here someplace. Well, I mean, here's one right here. There are so many streamers associated with this that it is sometimes hard to tell. Here's one. And this streamer, these are the Indian Wars. You know, the Army fought the Indian Wars for 100 years. The first Indian War the first Indian campaign the U.S. Army fought was in 1790 when Washington was the president. And they went on for 100 years. The last one was in 1890 on a reservation up in South Dakota. But in this particular one, this is identified as Dakota, 1867. And see, that was 9 years before Custer and the 7th Cavalry got killed up in Montana. So the 18th Infantry was fighting the same Indians, the Cheyenne and the Sioux, in this particular case, that Custer tied into later on. This battalion also participated in the Spanish-American War, as we heard, particularly in Manila. And then later came World War I. In 1917, when the United States entered World War I, the Army did not have a single organized division, not one. We were flat-footed. And we started getting organized, and we put together a total of 4 big infantry regiments to include the 18th Infantry. The 18th Infantry was one of the building blocks, foundation unit for the American Expeditionary Force. And they put together a division that was called the American Expeditionary Division. And they transported those units to Europe, and they picked up more units there, and they put together a division, which they then called the 1st Infantry Division. And during this outfit was only in combat for about a year, the last year of the First World War, but a number of big campaigns. And we could pull some of them out of here. And again, I mean, here's one right here, Lorraine, 1918. These are big campaigns in France, where the 18th Infantry got a bloody nose and became well known by the German Army for the aggressive way in which 18th Infantry soldiers fought. The division was still intact in 1940 and 41 with the advent of World War II. And this outfit that you're a member of made 3 amphibious landings in Europe during World War II. Initially in North Africa, and then the big island of Sicily, and lastly, the Normandy invasion, the invasion of France in June of 1944. And they fought across Europe, and they bumped into the big German defenses on their western border. The Germans had had several years to build a band of defensive positions, which entailed concrete bunkers, tank traps, minefields, lots of wire, and they were serious about defending their border. The first big objective that the United States Army had with the invasion of Germany was taking the big industrial city of Aachen. It's an enormous place. Some of you have probably been there. It was a big city then. And that city was part of that defensive belt. And just to the west of the city were some low hills that were also part of those defensive positions. And the 18th Infantry had the mission of taking those hills before the Army could really come to grips with invading Germany. And the 1st Battalion was the 1st unit of the United States Army, to try to penetrate those defensive positions. And this battalion was the pointy end of the American Army spear. They were the first battalion to get engaged with the Germans defending their homeland. That's where Vanguard comes from. This is the Army's Vanguard Battalion. And you know, Vanguard is more than just a salute. It's more than just a military welcome. It's a reminder of the fact that the soldiers of this battalion were the first American soldiers to engage the enemy on their own homeland and do it successfully. Now, when the battalion bumped into those defenses, they got stalled. But there was a man in the battalion named Billy Brown who thought he knew how to fix it. And he got himself a big bag of dynamite, and he crawled under the wire, and he crawled up a gully, and he got up against a bunker, and he pushed some of that dynamite into a gun aperture, and he touched her off. And then he went on to a second bunker, and he did the same thing. And finally, a great big command bunker, and he blew it up too. Now, Billy Brown was an interesting guy. He had enlisted in the Army when he was 15 years old. He probably had some kind of a story to tell to his recruiter. But he sneaked in, and he'd been in the Army about 20 years by the time that the Second World War got started. And in fact, he was an infantry company first sergeant in North Africa. But because of his leadership skills and the fact that there were a lot of company grade officers getting knocked off, he received a battlefield commission. And he went ashore in Normandy as a first lieutenant, platoon leader in Charlie Company of this battalion. The Charlie Company commander was killed at Normandy, and Billy Brown was promoted into the job and was the new company commander. And he was the guy that figured out that if he had a bag of dynamite, he might be able to open the door. And that's exactly what he did. Now, about 2 months following that, the Germans did a big campaign farther north, which became known as the Battle of the Bulge. And that's where we come to Jim Sharp. You see, Jim Sharp was raised about 20 miles south of here on a farm. And he graduated from high school in the spring of 1944, just in time to go in the Army. And he found himself going to Europe as a replacement. And he wound up in B Company, 1st Battalion, 18th Infantry, as a rifleman. And he showed up, of course, it was the middle of the winter. And you know, people talk about bad winters in Europe. The fact is, the winter of 1944-45 was the coldest winter on record in Northern Europe. And that's when Jim showed up. And he met his squad leader, who introduced him to a foxhole. And there was already one guy in the foxhole, and Jim joined him. And they were there in the middle of the night. It was dark, and it was well below zero. It was really cold. And his squad leader had a couple of white capes, and he said, "Put these on. This is some kind of camouflage that might help in the snow." So they did. And then the squad leader said, "The company is going to attack in about an hour and a half, and we're going to cross those fields, and we're going to take that town. And the good news is, you guys get to ride on tanks." Well, Jim had a lot of questions. Nobody had any answers. Jim said, "I had seen a tank, but I'd never been close to one. I had certainly never ridden around on one, and I'd never been shot at either." So there were a whole bunch of exciting things that were going to come together here in about an hour. And when the tanks cranked up in the woods behind them, the Germans heard them and began to shell the woods. Artillery and mortar fires coming in, going off in the trees, shrapnels flying every which way. And a tank shows up, and Jim and his buddies climb on, and they're hanging on to the turret, and the tank takes off. And they're concerned about not falling off, because there's more tanks behind them. And they're hanging on as best they can, and it's dark, and it's snowing, and the artillery's coming in. And as they get close to the village, the German defenders start shooting, and there's tracers coming out. And with that, the tank crew cranks up the turret, moves the turret, fires the main gun a couple of times, starts shooting the coax machine gun, and Jim said there were tracers going every which way. And when they finally got into the town, they got off their tank and they found a basement just as quickly as they could. Even being in a basement in a place like that would be relatively safe, but they felt that it was a lot safer than it was riding around on that tank. And I know, Jim, you've already been recognized, but buddy, I just want to tell you that we appreciate you getting here. Jim stayed with the company until they had crossed the Rhine River. They were well into Germany. He got wounded and medevac. But he healed up and was sent back. And by the time he got back, the war was over. And he'd also been promoted. He was a brand new sergeant. And so they assigned him to be a sergeant of the guard at the Nuremberg war crimes trials. That's when the Allies put together a court, and they rounded up about 15 or 20 of the senior Nazi, German Nazis, and they tried them, and they hanged most of them. And Jim was a sergeant of the guard at those trials. It's a good thing he didn't look much like a German, Jim. That'd be a bad place to have any kind of confusion. Following World War II, this outfit did not go to the Korean War. It was in Europe. You know, the Cold War was still going on, and we were still facing off the Russians in the Warsaw Pact in Europe. And that's where the 18th Infantry was during the early 50s. But by the mid-60s, the 18th Infantry went to war in Vietnam. And in fact, participated in 11 campaigns during the Vietnam War. And these Vietnam campaigns are gold with 3 red stripes. These are the colors of the South Vietnamese flag. And the 3 red stripes represent the 3 geographic areas of Vietnam. And this particular one is counteroffensive phase 6. And that would have been sometime in 1967 or 68. And of course, later on, the battalion fought, as we heard, in Iraq and Afghanistan, Horn of Africa. So, when you look at your battalion colors, and you look at these campaign streamers, you need to understand that this is the military history, the combat history of this battalion. There have been thousands and thousands of soldiers who have served in this battalion ahead of you. And they are the soldiers that fought through these campaigns. You know, the vast majority of them were volunteers, the same as you are. The vast majority of those soldiers accepted their mission, and they took on their mission as best they could, the same as you very recently completed your deployment mission in a very professional way. And those soldiers also saluted the national colors, and they followed the colors where their orders took them, just as you do and as you will. So, when you look at this isn't just a colorful little history lesson. This is the lifeblood and the heritage of this battalion, and you need to really appreciate it. You need to honor that. Okay, let's. You know, I mentioned Billy Brown. When I was in this battalion, there were times when I had the feeling that possibly some soldiers of yesteryear were hanging around, looking over my shoulder, and giving me a little bit of support, or maybe a little bit of encouragement that we all need from time to time. And I wanted to think that it would have been a soldier like Billy, our friend Billy Brown. You know, if Billy Brown knew that there was going to be a 1st Battalion, 18th Infantry Regimental get-together this evening, he would want to be here. He'd want to be here. He was the kind of guy that liked a good party. Billy and the 11 other Vanguard soldiers who have been recipients of the Congressional Medal of Honor over the years. I can imagine all of those soldiers showing up here. And they'd be here if they'd known there was a party. And when they walked through the door, I would expect them to say something like, you know, to the guest speaker, something like, good enough. It's time to wrap it up. And as a perceptive guest speaker, I would tend to say, I understand and I agree. It's time to wrap it up. And it's time to begin to continue the party. Vanguard!